Have you ever wondered why a man becomes most obsessed with the woman he can no longer grasp, not just physically but emotionally, psychologically and spiritually? Why, in the silence of her withdrawal, he begins to spiral, to chase, to fantasize, to suffer? Carl Jung might say it is not the woman herself he longs for, but the part of his soul she unknowingly awakened and then refused to surrender. You see, most men are not prepared to meet a truly individuated woman, one who no longer lives to be seen, chosen, or saved. She is not reacting to his moods. She is not waiting for his validation. She is not sculpted from his expectations. This woman, the untouchable one, is not distant because she plays games. She is distant because she has met herself in the depths of her own inner chaos. She has burned the false self, she has danced with her shadows, and now she walks through the world unclaimed, unbothered, untamed. To the average man, the unconscious man, she is both a dream and a threat. She awakens the anima within him, the feminine soul image buried in his unconscious, the internal muse he has projected onto women since boyhood. But unlike the others, she does not return the projection. She does not collapse into his need to be needed. And this denial, this spiritual refusal, births a gnawing obsession, not with her body, though he will ache for that too, but with the mystery of her detachment. Jung wrote that what we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate, and the untouchable woman becomes the mirror of this fate, the mirror he cannot control. He may try to reduce her to something digestible. She's cold, he tells himself. She must have issues. But beneath the surface, his soul is restless, because deep down he knows she is not wounded, she is whole, and that wholeness exposes his fracture. She does not punish him, she sympathises. Lie no longer feeds his ego. She is not cruel, she is clear, and clarity to the man ruled by illusion is unbearable. Some women lose themselves in love, but the untouchable woman was born from losing herself first, from giving too much, from bleeding emotionally for those who could not hold her depth. She has loved men who needed fixing, who feared her strength, who drained her light, and through it all she did not harden. She awakened. She peeled back every layer of herself that was built for survival. The people-pleasing, the over-giving, the performance of perfection. She faced the terror of her own loneliness. She made peace with her longing. She held her own heart when no one else would. This is the woman who no longer settles, not because she's arrogant, but because she's aware. She knows her worth, not as a concept, but as an experience, and that knowledge makes her untouchable. To become untouchable is not to become unavailable. It is to become unshakable. A woman in this state is not waiting. She is becoming. Every day she refines her boundaries. She protects her peace. She lives in devotion to her soul, not to her roles. She walks away, not in anger, but in clarity. And that clarity becomes intoxicating to the man who expected to possess her. Because addiction, psychologically, is not always to a substance. It is to a sensation. And the sensation of losing control in the presence of a woman who cannot be controlled is maddening. Jung believed that the feminine, when fully embodied, holds the key to transformation. But transformation demands ego death, and most men are not ready to die to become new. So what happens? He becomes haunted, not just by her silence, but by who he was in her presence, because she did not need him, and yet he felt seen. She did not cling to him, and yet he felt known. She mirrored the man he could become, and then she vanished. That kind of woman imprints on the psyche. He may try to replace her, distract himself, downgrade his desires, but no one else awakens the same ache. Because she did not touch only his skin, she touched his shadow. And this is where the addiction begins. The moment a man feels a woman is no longer emotionally available, no longer orbiting his needs, his moods, his timelines, a part of him panics. Not in the surface sense, but in the soul sense, because she has stepped outside the matrix of his control. She has withdrawn the supply, and now his validation engine collapses. She doesn't respond to breadcrumbs, she doesn't chase clarity, she doesn't beg to be chosen. Her absence becomes louder than any words, her stillness, a confrontation. He might try to bait her with sudden affection, grand gestures, long messages, or silence of his own. But the untouchable woman has moved beyond the terrain of manipulation. She lives in truth now, and in that truth, his performance holds no weight. It is in this space, between her detachment and his confusion, that the psychological hook is set. The more she detaches, the more he obsesses, not because of who she is to him, but because of what she represents within him, the feminine energy he has long rejected in himself. Receptivity, stillness, intuition, surrender. He cannot control it, so he craves it, and when it is no longer offered to him freely, he becomes addicted to the absence. This is the paradox. The woman who no longer needs him becomes the one he cannot forget. She becomes a wound he cannot name, not because she harmed him, but because she reflected his emptiness without trying to fill it. In her absence, he confronts the echo of all the versions of himself he refused to become. This is not a normal loss, this is soul starvation, and he cannot admit it, not to himself, not to anyone, because to do so would require humility. It would require him to see that she was not too much, but precisely enough, and that he was not prepared to meet her there. Jung would call this the confrontation with the shadow, the reckoning with all that lives in the unconscious. The pride, the fear of abandonment, the craving for motherly validation masked as sexual attraction. The untouchable woman does not offer healing for this. She offers exposure. And when a man is not ready to face the dark mirror she holds up to his psyche, he turns her into a fantasy, an enemy, or a regret. But he never forgets her, because she is the threshold his ego refused to cross. And what of the woman, the one who walked away, not out of cruelty but out of sacred preservation? She is not emotionless, she feels everything, deeply, but she no longer makes herself available to be consumed by those who do not know how to honor what they're devouring. Her love is not transactional, it's not performative, it's not shaped to soothe a man's insecurities. Her love is elemental, it's fire, it's water, it's wind and stone, and when she gives it, it is a blessing, but when it is taken for granted, she becomes a ghost. She knows now that silence can speak louder than 1,000 explanations. That distance is sometimes the most intimate response to disrespect. That detachment is not cruelty, it is clarity, and it is this clarity that terrifies the man. The untouchable woman has risen from the ashes of self-betrayal. She has lived through the slow death of overgiving. She knows what it feels like to pour love into bottomless wells, to wait for crumbs, to dance for attention. And she has chosen, finally, to stop bleeding for those who call her too much, when in truth they are simply unprepared to receive. She is not playing hard to get, she is hard to reach, not because she hides, but because she no longer lowers her frequency to be understood by those who refuse to rise. Her standards are not barriers, they are altars. To approach her now is to bring reverence, not convenience, depth, not charm, truth, not performance. And this is what confuses the man whose power came from her emotional accessibility. When she was reachable, he could take his time, he could come and go, he could measure her worth in how much she was willing to endure. But the moment she became untouchable, the moment she stopped making excuses for his absence, his indifference, his inconsistency, she became unforgettable. There is no addiction more haunting than the one that begins when the supply is taken away. And for the man who lived in the comfort of her unconditional presence, the withdrawal is existential. It touches something deeper than desire. It touches the wound of inadequacy he's kept buried beneath confidence, beneath conquest, beneath the illusion of control. He will search for her in others, unconsciously. He will be drawn to the echo of her energy, but it won't be the same. Because energy that comes from wounding, from chasing, from need, from insecurity, cannot replicate the resonance of a woman who knows who she is, who doesn't perform love, but embodies it, who doesn't demand but commands. The difference is night and day, and he knows it, even if he'll never say it. And so the obsession grows, not always loudly. Sometimes it lingers in silence, in late-night scrolls, in unspoken memories, in relationships that feel half alive. She haunts him, not as a ghost, but as a reminder. You met something real, and you weren't ready. He may blame her, diminish her, rewrite the story so his ego stays intact. But somewhere, in the quiet, he knows, she was not asking too much. She was asking for truth, for coherence, for consciousness. And when she didn't find it, she left, not as punishment, but as a promise to herself. This is what makes her untouchable. Not the cold shoulder, not manipulation, not aloofness, but self-respect, the fierce protection of her energy, the refusal to be reabsorbed into patterns that dishonor her evolution. She is no longer here to prove her worth. She is here to live it. And to the man still ruled by his unhealed parts, that worth becomes both magnetic and maddening, because somewhere inside, he knows he lost not just a woman, but a mirror, a sacred reflection of the life he could live if only he were brave enough to grow. But growth demands surrender, and surrender is the language of the feminine, the one he was never taught to speak. And this is where the dynamic turns volatile, not in violence but in vulnerability. The man may not even understand why he keeps thinking about her, why certain songs bring her face to mind, why the smell of jasmine or the echo of laughter cracks something open in his chest. He may convince himself it's nostalgia, that it's just memory, but it's deeper than that. He is being summoned, not by her, but by the part of himself that awoke in her presence. The sacred, buried self, the one who longs to feel, to surrender, to be known. But to reach it, he must go where he fears most, into his own unconscious, into his pain, into his guilt, into the reality that he was not present enough, aware enough, man enough to hold her when he had her. She didn't demand a king, she revealed whether he was one, and when he failed to rise, she didn't shrink, she vanished, not into bitterness but into sovereignty, into wholeness, into a life that no longer revolved around convincing men to see her, because once a woman sees herself, truly, she becomes immune to half-love. This is the woman who chooses solitude over compromise, silence over performance. Her intuition is no longer debated, her standards are not suggestions. She doesn't argue for respect, she embodies it. And it is in that embodiment that she becomes magnetic. Because feminine energy, when it is grounded in self-worth, is not passive. It is potent. It is the storm behind the stillness. It is the ache behind the man's bravado. It is the very force he cannot name, yet cannot live without. Jung understood this intimately. He wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But transformation requires destruction of illusion, of control, of ego. And so many men resist this. They want love to feel good. But real love, conscious love, burns. And she burns quietly now, not in anger, not in vengeance, but in divine detachment. She no longer over-explains her absence. She does not justify her boundaries. She does not shrink her soul to keep a man comfortable. She understands the high cost of her light, and she charges accordingly, because she paid for it, with years of self-abandonment, with sleepless nights wondering if she was too much or not enough, with tears shed for men who only knew how to consume her, not cherish her. She has faced the cold loneliness of knowing her worth, and now she wears it like armor. To the unawakened man, she appears untouchable, and she is to him, because until he sheds the masks, until he meets his own shadow, until he stops looking for a woman to fix what he refuses to feel, she will remain out of reach. He may watch her from a distance, on screens, in passing, in dreams. A part of him may want to return, to say what was left unsaid. But he senses the shift. She is no longer accessible to his chaos. He cannot breadcrumb his way back into her energy. The door is closed, not locked in malice, but sealed by growth. And in this, his soul wrestles, because addiction is not to the person, but to the feeling in their presence. And she made him feel seen. She saw the child beneath the armor, the poet beneath the pride, the king behind the fear. And now, in her absence, he is left with himself, with the void, with the question, who am I? And to the man still addicted to the idea of her, that energy is a drug, because he knows now what he didn't before. You don't chase a woman like that. You become the man who can stand still in her presence without flinching. But standing still in her presence is not a simple act. It requires everything a man was taught to suppress. To stand before an untouchable woman, truly stand, is to lay down the performance and let the silence speak. No armor, no script, no conquest, just presence, just truth, just the rawness of being seen without control. Most men have never done this. They were taught to chase, to conquer, to dominate, to collect women like trophies, like extensions of ego, not to feel them, not to honor them, not to understand them as mirrors of their own lost wholeness. And so when they meet a woman who cannot be collected, only witnessed, they are thrown into disarray, because nothing they do works. Not charm, not detachment, not chasing, not withholding. She has already faced herself. She is not seduced by half-grown men repeating old patterns. She doesn't need him to fill a void. She doesn't need him to fix her. She doesn't need him to make her feel worthy. Her worth is not for sale. This is the woman who has become untouchable, not because she is hardened, but because she is whole. She has tasted the bitter wine of betrayal, abandonment, disappointment, and digested it into wisdom. She no longer bleeds when men leave. She no longer begs when they withdraw. She no longer adjusts her rhythm to match their chaos. She is her own rhythm now, and that rhythm is intoxicating. To the masculine psyche, especially one in flux, she becomes a paradox. How can she be so soft and yet so far away, so inviting, yet utterly ungraspable? She awakens in him the archetypal feminine, the anima, the soulful, mysterious, nurturing, intuitive energy buried deep in the unconscious male mind. She becomes his inner muse, his silent tormentor, his unreachable goddess. But she is not an illusion. She is not his fantasy. She is real, and that is what terrifies him. Because if she is real, then he must be too. No more masks, no more projections, no more hiding behind ambition, aloofness, or apathy. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And that is exactly what she does. She brings the unconscious to the surface, not through force, but through presence. She triggers everything he's buried, his fear of not being enough, his resentment of powerful women, his craving for nurturing love that doesn't require performance. She doesn't soothe these wounds, she reveals them, and then she walks away, leaving him to tend to the open wound himself, not out of cruelty, not out of malice, but because she knows she cannot be the medicine and the mirror at once. She did not come to heal him, she came to remind him of who he could be, of what love could feel like, of what his soul craves when the ego is silent. And now that she is gone, he cannot escape that reminder. It lingers, in his breath, in his bones, in his bed. He sees her in the quiet moments, the late nights when distraction fails. He hears her voice in other women's mouths, feels her essence in other bodies, but it never matches. It always falls short, because she didn't just touch his flesh. She touched the part of him he thought no one could see. And now he's haunted, not just by her absence, but by who he became in her presence. The vulnerability she drew out of him, the tenderness he allowed, the dreams he confessed, the softness he swore he didn't have. He felt alive with her, but now she is gone, not vanished, evolved. She didn't disappear, she ascended, and now she lives where his ego can't dare. It follows her in a realm of truth, beauty, and emotional maturity. She didn't cut him off to teach him a lesson. She left because she was done teaching men how to hold what they aren't ready to cherish. She knows now her love is not a school for broken men. Her tenderness is not a rehabilitation center for emotionally unavailable boys. Her energy is a sacred offering, not a trial run. And so she chooses solitude over confusion, silence over explanation, peace over potential. Because when a woman becomes untouchable, it doesn't mean she has no love to give. It means she refuses to give it to those who only know how to consume. She is not withholding, she is discerning. She gives slowly now, carefully, only to those who meet her in the fire, not from a distance but with open hands, willing to burn with her, to die to who they were and rise into who they're meant to become. That is the only kind of man who will ever touch her again. Not the one who wants to possess her, but the one who wants to honor her. Not the one who feels entitled to her body, but the one who longs to worship her soul. And until such a man arrives, she walks alone, but never lonely, because her solitude is not a void, it is a sanctuary, a temple built from every version of herself she had to bury to survive, now resurrected, radiant, and whole. There is a particular kind of silence a woman carries after she has returned to herself, a silence not born of pain, but of power. It is not the silence of suppression, of walking on eggshells, of waiting for the right moment to speak. No, it is the silence of no longer needing to explain who she is, the silence of watching, of discerning, of knowing she does not chase energy that costs her peace. This silence is what he feels when he reaches out and gets no reply, when he senses her presence in the void and yet cannot touch it, when her energy once flooded his world like sunlight and now it is gone, reclaimed, redirected, not toward bitterness, but toward becoming. She is not withholding love, she has simply stopped offering it where it isn't cherished. This is the natural consequence of individuation, a core concept in Jung's psychology. It is the process by which a person becomes whole, authentic, integrated, and once a woman has walked that path, she no longer fits inside the boxes others built for her. Obedient daughter, compliant lover, self-sacrificing partner, she no longer contorts her body, her voice, her needs to make herself palatable. She belongs to herself now, to the man still ruled by his unconscious. This is unbearable, because he never expected her to leave the role. He fell in love with her essence but grew accustomed to her submission. He fed off her vulnerability but mistook it for weakness. He misread her softness as a signal that she would always be there. And then one day, she was not. That is the moment when obsession begins, not when she is crying, explaining, pleading, but when she goes quiet, not out of strategy but because she sees clearly now, and what she sees, she no longer wants. You see, there is nothing more psychologically destabilizing to the masculine psyche than the realization that the woman he once believed was his has evolved beyond his reach. It triggers a collapse, the slow unraveling of the ego's illusion that love can be controlled, delayed, or owned. In that collapse, he is forced to confront everything he repressed. The fear of being emotionally naked, the rage of not being chosen, the grief of having touched the sacred and let it slip through his fingers. And yet, the untouchable woman does not look back, because she is not living in reaction to his absence. She is living in devotion to her presence. She is not waiting to be remembered. She is remembering herself. Every morning, she awakens, not with he ache of, why didn't he choose me, but with the calm knowing of, I choose me, again and again. That choice is not easy. It is forged in fire. In nights she cried alone, battling the temptation to shrink, to settle, to return to the familiarity of almost love. It is built from scars, from closed doors, from the echoes of every man who mistook her depth for a phase, her body for a conquest, her spirit for a challenge to overcome. She has buried versions of herself to become this woman, and now her energy carries the weight of initiation. She is no longer for the man who wants her to be a mirror for his ego. She is for the man willing to become a mirror for her soul, a man who has done the work, who does not seek her light as a means of avoiding his darkness, but who has faced his own and survived. Until then, she remains untouchable, not out of disdain, but out of discipline. The kind of discipline that says, I will not bleed for love anymore. I will not abandon my body to feel desired. I will not confuse emotional chaos for passion. She has unlearned those illusions. Now she lives in stillness, not the stillness of waiting, but of sovereignty. She moves with intention, speaks with precision, loves with discernment. Her yes is sacred, her no is final. And those who once knew her, who once tasted her openness, her loyalty, her devotion, feel the shift in their bones. They may not speak of it, they may not even fully understand it, but they feel it. The disconnection, the distance, the elevation. Some try to return, others silently grieve, but none forget. Because when a woman becomes untouchable, she becomes unforgettable. Not because she's cold, but because she's rare. Not because she withholds, but because she embodies value. Not because she plays games, but because she honors the truth. The truth is this: she did not become untouchable to punish him. She became untouchable to protect herself, and in doing so she has risen beyond the reach of those who cannot meet her in the realm of emotional maturity, spiritual depth, and embodied presence. She is now a gatekeeper, not of her heart, but of her frequency. And that frequency no longer vibrates in desperation. It hums in alignment. It pulses with power. It radiates from a center that no longer bends to be chosen because she chooses herself. There comes a moment in a woman's life, not always loud, not always cinematic, when she simply decides. It is not a declaration made to anyone else. It is not screamed into the void or written in ink. It is quiet, subtle, sacred. She decides that her energy is no longer a free resource, that her love will no longer be siphoned by those who mistake access for entitlement, that her presence, once given freely, must now be earned, not through performance but through depth. This is the moment she becomes untouchable. It doesn't happen overnight. It is a becoming, a slow, painful emergence from the chrysalis of her own suffering. The girl she once was is dead. The woman she is now had to die to be born, and that death was not easy. It came through betrayals she didn't see coming, through silence where there should have been accountability, through watching men she once trusted reveal that they were never really holding her, only the fantasy she fulfilled. She has grieved enough to stop explaining. This is the wound that shaped her wisdom. She no longer opens her soul as a peace offering. She no longer performs gentleness for the sake of comfort. Her softness still exists, but it is sacred now, protected, guarded by discernment, sharpened by pain. And to the man who once thought he could come and go, this new version of her is foreign. He knew her light when it was for everyone. He touched her when she still believed love could change someone who wasn't ready. He drank from her cup without ever wondering what it cost her to keep it full. Now she walks with a different gravity. He feels it before he sees her again, if he ever does. Her name lingers differently in his mouth. Her memory returns at inconvenient hours. He replays their last conversation, wondering if there was something he missed. Something she said that should have warned him that she was done. Not in anger, not in threat, but in a way that meant never again. He doesn't realize that the final goodbye is often silent. It doesn't come in words. It comes in disinterest, in stillness, in absence. The phone that no longer rings, the energy that no longer circles. The woman who no longer needs to be heard to know her truth is valid. Her life no longer revolves around who stays or who goes. It revolves around alignment. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And this woman has claimed that privilege. She is no longer a projection of a man's anima, not a muse, not a fantasy, not a mirror for his unacknowledged emotions. She is a person, a sovereign force, a whole self. This is what makes her untouchable. Not aloofness, not cruelty, clarity. Clarity that says, I see what you are, I see what I am, and I will no longer shrink to maintain connection. For a man who hasn't done the work, this clarity is destabilizing. He can no longer manipulate the narrative. She is no longer swayed by promises without action. She has heard enough apologies to know that most of them are apologies for being caught, not for being careless. And that kind of man, the man still living from ego, cannot reach her now. She is no longer caught in the karmic loop of trying to teach a man how to love her. That is no longer her burden. She is not a lesson. She is not an emotional battleground for broken masculinity. She is a sanctuary. To the man who is ready, truly ready, she is an invitation to rise, not to earn her love through begging or grand gestures, but to become the kind of man who can meet her where she lives now, in truth, in tenderness, in power. He must strip away the layers of false self, the pride that masks the longing, the detachment that hides the fear, the bravado that covers the ache of never having been truly seen. He must descend into his own unconscious and make peace with the shadows she already recognized in him long before he did. Only then, only when he has faced his own feminine, integrated his anima, broken free from the mother wound and the praise addiction, only then will he understand why she left and why she had to. Because she was not just another woman, she was the threshold between the life he lived in denial and the man he could become in devotion. But she is no longer waiting. This is what makes her untouchable. She no longer confuses potential with purpose. She no longer sees brokenness and thinks it's her role to glue it back together. She no longer translates lack of presence as mystery or emotional distance as depth. She knows the difference now. She can taste in a man's voice whether he has met himself, whether he has bled for truth, whether he has confronted the abyss inside his own chest or still uses women to fill it. And when she sees that he hasn't done the work, she no longer explains. She simply exits. Her boundaries are not requests, they are realms. You do not enter her life by accident anymore. You are summoned, and to be summoned is to be ready. Not perfect, but present, humble, accountable, conscious. If he cannot meet her there, she does not judge him. She blesses him and lets him go, because she knows you cannot force a man to awaken. You can only awaken yourself, and in doing so you become untouchable to anyone still committed to sleep. There is no thunder when she finally lets go of the man who couldn't see her. No dramatic goodbye, no firestorm of words or final confrontation, just a quiet closing of the heart. A still, reverent silence like the last page of a sacred book. She doesn't slam the door, she seals it softly, permanently. This is what men often don't understand. The end doesn't come with a scream, it comes with emptiness. Not the kind that longs, the kind that knows. She no longer waits for him to arrive. She no longer checks her phone, replays their last conversation, or dreams of what if, because she has tasted herself again. She has remembered the texture of her own wholeness. She has come back to the wild, vast terrain of her own soul where no man's voice gets to define her worth. And in this return, she finds something she didn't even know she had lost: peace. Not the peace that comes from certainty or closure, but the kind that blooms when you stop bargaining with your own soul just to be loved. She lives there now. In that peace, the obsession turns. In that peace, the detachment settles in, not as defense, but as truth. Because once you've seen what self-abandonment costs, you don't pay that price again. Not for attraction, not for chemistry, not even for the echo of something that once felt like home. The untouchable woman knows this. Not everything that burns is sacred. Some flames destroy, some fires devour, and if you keep touching them, thinking you're being loyal, you end up ash. But she is no longer ash. She is alchemy. Every heartbreak, every silence, every moment of being misunderstood, unseen, unchosen, she has turned it all into gold. She has turned pain into precision. She has turned longing into discernment. She has turned need into knowing. She doesn't need to be chased anymore. She doesn't need to be proven right. She doesn't even need to be remembered, because he remembers herself. This is the final liberation, the moment when the pattern dies, when she no longer plays the role of healer, savior, fixer, when she stops trying to earn what she is already worthy of, when she sheds the last illusion that she must be less in order to be kept. The man who once thought she would always be there, the man who assumed she would always circle back, now sits with the void, not because she wanted him to suffer, but because she finally stopped suffering for him. And from that void, he may begin. He may finally look inward. He may feel what he refused to feel. He may question the armor he's worn for decades, the games, the detachment, the fear. He may finally see that what he lost was not just a woman, but a chance to meet the divine through love, a chance to become real. Some men awaken here, others repeat, but she is already gone, not in bitterness, not in pain, in clarity. She walks now with light feet and an untamed heart. She does not ask who will follow. She does not ask who understands. Her life is no longer a performance. It is a prayer, a declaration of wholeness whispered through the way she moves, the way she speaks, the way she refuses to settle. This is what makes her untouchable, not because no one is worthy, but because she knows the cost of being touched by someone who isn't. She is not hard to love. She is just no longer willing to be loved poorly, and so she waits, not passively but powerfully, not for a man to complete her, but for the kind of presence that does not require her to betray herself in order to be loved. She waits in fullness, in laughter, in solitude, in softness, in power. And when or if a man ever rises to meet her, she will not make it easy, not because she is cruel, but because love is not a performance. It is a sacred exchange, one built on presence, on truth, on depth. She will not be too hit again by a man who cannot hold all of her, because now she belongs to herself. And the woman who belongs to herself is untouchable. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.